Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another episode of Buha's Block. On today's show, we're going to be doing part one of a two-part mailbag. I posted a mailbag prompt on YouTube, and you guys responded with over 30 questions, so I will be splitting it into two parts. I will try my best to answer as many of them as possible. On today's mailbag, we're going to be covering my biggest takeaway from this season for the Lakers, several Austin Reaves questions, my quick ranking of the Lakers center options, what piece of advice I would give to Luka Doncic if he had to listen to one thing from me, and several more questions. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, first question here from @ChuckDangler, aka Fang Charlie. What was your biggest takeaway from this season? What did you like most about it? And what was the part you wish could have gone better? In parentheses, of course, aside from the early exit. My biggest takeaway from this season, I'm going to echo my big picture takeaway from the Lakers Game 5 loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves with Luka Doncic and LeBron James and JJ Redick and Austin Reaves and even role players like Rui Hachimura, Dorian Finney-Smith. I think the Lakers have the foundation of a contending team. There's a reason why I consider them a contender going into the playoffs. I had them as the fourth best team in the NBA. That obviously did not bear out, but I still think that the framework of that type of contender is there. And with a few tweaks, most notably upgrading the starting center spot, and then also adding some more perimeter two-way play and just some depth to the roster overall, I think the back end of the roster needs to be improved, and they need closer to 11 to 12 playable players in the regular season. If they can do that, then I think they are in a good spot for next season and long term, of course, with Luka Doncic, with JJ. I think they are going to be contending for the next half decade at least. As for what I liked most about the season, I would have to say the Luka trade, both the shocking nature of it. It's rare to be shocked by a transaction in 2025, but this is by far the most shocking transaction I have ever covered that I can remember. Just something of this magnitude rarely comes out of nowhere. And in terms of the part that I wish could have gone better, aside from the Lakers losing in 5 games and making me look foolish for considering them the fourth best team in the NBA, I would say two things come to mind. One, I think when we look back on the sliding doors moment of the season, it was the back-to-back injuries to Rui Hachimura and LeBron James. Rui missed about 3 weeks. LeBron missed a couple of weeks. And if you look at the rhythm that the Lakers were in before the injuries, I think had those two guys stayed healthy, that would have continued through the rest of the regular season and into the playoffs. And the Lakers would have had a legitimate chance to be the number 2 seed. And who knows, maybe they would have lost to Golden State in round 1 based on how they played against Minnesota in round 1. But I think with that extra few weeks of rhythm and continuity and chemistry and just more on-court reps for the starting group, for the closing group, and just for the key members of the rotation, I think that would have been a big factor for them come playoff time. The second thing is the offense, and the offense just never actualizing its potential. I felt that this group had the potential to be a top 3, top 5 offense in the NBA. They never quite got there. I thought it looked better to close the regular season, and then it just fell off a cliff in the playoffs. They could barely crack 100 points against Minnesota, and you got to give Minnesota credit for their defense and their defensive game planning and just their personnel and their physicality and length and size and all of that. But looking at the offensive organization for the Lakers, I know that was something we talked about a lot on here, something that certainly could have been better for them. They never got close to scratching the surface of their potential on the offensive end. So I thought it would be the inverse, if anything, that this group would be better offensively and worse defensively. Whereas at least in the playoffs, when it mattered most, they were okay defensively and had some pretty good defensive stretches, but it was more so the offensive end where they struggled to generate high percentage looks, where they struggled to create separation and get to the rim and generate open threes and like get to the free throw line, and just a lot of the things that they did when they looked their best in the regular season, they just couldn't quite do it consistently in the playoffs. All right, for the next question, it's going to be a series of questions because I've been getting a lot of Austin Reaves related questions. So I'm going to answer 3 of these in succession. So first question from at JP Salazar 73. Can Luka and AR be the starting backcourt of a championship team? AR is an elite number 3 option, but with Luka, I think he's a terrible fit because of their deficiencies on defense. A shakeup might be needed to get a POA guard defender, 3-and-D wing, and lob threat center. Next one from at Sanjay Shriek. Can AR be a viable number 3 option on this team, or should we trade him away for a 2-way wing? And final one from at Daru. I see a lot of Laker fans wanting the team to trade Reaves. Personally, I don't agree, but what is the possibility that something like this would actually happen? He played pretty bad in the series, but I still want him to stay a Laker. Austin has been the topic du jour for Laker fans on Lakers Twitter, on Reddit. I see it in the comments on my videos. I saw it in the questions for this mailbag. And there's a lot of fan frustration with Austin and his performance in the first round against Minnesota. And I get it. I understand it. I agree that Austin was subpar and bad for several stretches of that series. I think it's been a little bit overblown. And I don't think he was as bad as some people have made it out to be. I don't think he was as bad, for example, as D'Angelo Russell was in either of the 2 Denver series. And I know that's been a popular comparison. I fundamentally disagree. I think that's ignoring the defensive side, in addition to the numbers also being in Austin's favor. But I understand the frustration. I understand that Austin did not live up to that number 3 billing in the Minnesota series. I'm actually going to answer these in reverse order, so I will start with the third one first. I agree with Daru. I would not trade Austin, at least not right now. And I think the possibility of him being traded is actually low, at least this summer. And now this is something that we reported at The Athletic. For those who missed it last week on Friday, I had a big report with Sam Amick. One of the things that we reported in there is that the Lakers do not want to trade Austin. And that is something I've continually heard for over 3 years now. And that's something that I've reported multiple times over the last few years, that the Lakers have a high bar for trading Austin. They value him. They view him highly. And just forget what we reported and what we've heard behind the scenes. Just look at the public messaging where JJ Redick and Rob Pelinka both spoke highly of Austin during the Lakers exit interviews last week. Rob called him one of the pillars of the organization. Going back a couple of months, JJ, remember, mentioned Austin in that conversation that he, LeBron, and Luka had about the state of the offense at that time. And JJ said at the time, like, of course, Austin would be included in this conversation. So JJ thinks highly of Austin. Rob thinks highly of Austin. Jeannie thinks highly of Austin. So I don't expect Austin to be traded this summer, despite a lot of people willing to sell him for 20 cents on the dollar, 40 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. I'll be honest, I've seen most of the fake trades that you guys have sent me and that just on social media, and a lot of them are selling low on Austin. So I think that's a whole other conversation. But like, if you want to trade Austin, if you want to make that argument, at least sell him for his value, sell high on him. But I think some of the guys, it's like there's backup wings that Austin is being pitched for. And I'm like, do you not realize how good Austin is? I mean, he's a top 50, top 40 player in the league. It should be valued at that. So selling him for like the 8th guy on a mediocre team, I don't get it. I think if you're the Lakers and you look at Austin's contract situation, you're going to offer him the extension this summer. He's going to reject it. I'm fairly confident in that. Then he's going to play out this next year, opt out in 2026, and then get a bag in that summer. The shrewd move, if you want to move Austin, and I'm not advocating for that, to be clear, but if you want to entertain that, I think you let him play out this year. You sign him to the big deal, and then You see how you couldn't trade him until about the midway point of that following season, 2026, 2027, but he'll be on the new contract, meaning you can trade him for a player in that salary range, maybe combine another contract, and depending on where you are, first apron, second apron, all that stuff. But then you could get a big piece back and get, leverage Austin and his value and his contract into potentially getting another all-star level piece back that maybe fits better with Luka. But I think the one thing with trading Austin now, for example, aside from the Lakers' reluctance and hesitance to do it, is just you are trading him with a year left before he hits free agency. So any team that trades for him is taking on the risk of him potentially walking in 2026 if he doesn't want to be there. He's functionally an expiring contract. They'll have an advantage of having him in their program for a year and potentially being able to offer more money, but there is a risk there of if you trade for Austin now, like this summer or even next season, he could be a flight risk. And depending on what you give up, like I think the Lakers would ask for a lot. It would probably be a high level player coming back. Like that is a risk for those teams. So I think that is something to remember when talking about Austin and some of these fake trades. As for the second question, if Austin can be a viable number 3 or if the Lakers should trade him for a two-way wing, I would ask you the question of who is the two-way wing that you are trying to trade him for. I think it has to be a player of a certain caliber. And again, a top 50-ish type player. And most of the guys I've seen Austin hypothetically traded for are not in that conversation. And I think if the Lakers are going to trade him, it's going to have to be a really, really good player. Can Austin be a viable number 3 on this team? I think so. Now, this is a nuanced conversation, and it's probably a conversation that's worth its own podcast at some point here coming up soon. I think with Austin, you have to optimize around him. And especially if we have the context of Austin and Luka together, I think you want to surround those guys with a certain level of length and size and athleticism. So if you're going to go with Austin and Luka as your starting backcourt, at least your starting backcourt offensively, then I think the other 3 guys have to be big at their position. They have to be long. They have to be good defensively. They have to be athletic. I think LeBron fits with that. But when you get to the other 2 positions, you clearly need that starting center upgrade. And then you probably need a more defensive-minded, athletic wing to be the other front court player. The more I've thought about this and the Lakers and their roster construction, I think it's becoming more of a Rui versus Austin conversation. And again, that's probably worth its own episode. But I think if we pencil in Luka, LeBron, and starting center X as 3 fits of the starting lineup, you're going to have a center who's more athletic, who's better defensively, more physical, better on the glass, all that stuff. So you have that guy at the 5. You have LeBron technically at the 4 defensively. And then you have Luka, who I also would posit is more of a 4 defensively, but front court defender, whatever. What you need, if you're going to have Austin in there, then that other player ideally is someone who can defend backcourt positions and or scale up to defend some wings. And that's where Rui does not check that box. Rui is not a guy who you want guarding backcourt players, especially not point guards. And it's not DFS either. So I think looking at like the 2024 Mavericks, it's more of that Derrick Jones Jr. type. And I think the Lakers need that type of guy on their roster. So if you look at, in my opinion, the optimal starting lineup construction, it would be starting center X, who's this athletic, rim running, vertical lob threat, rim protector type. LeBron, a wing who can defend 1 through 3, can take on backcourt assignments, but can also guard some wings and at least shoot league average, if not better, from 3. And that's a tough player to find. Then Austin and Luka. And now I said Austin versus Rui because the other way to do this would be to keep Rui in the starting group and replace Austin with, let's say like a Max Christie, could also be a Derrick Jones type, but a Max Christie type of more of like a 3-and-D shooting guard who that player can guard 1 through 3. And then it's a similar thing where Rui is the one guarding the secondary perimeter guys. Luka's, you're hiding him more as a helper. LeBron's guarding the fours, the centers guarding the centers. Between the two, I lean more toward the Austin construction because I just think he's a better player than Rui. I think he's a more consistent player than Rui. I also think the Lakers view that. So I always say, forget what I think about what the Lakers think. And they've clearly telegraphed that they view Austin as a number 3 and as someone to build around for the future. So I think the path forward, and it does not necessarily, when I say Rui versus Austin, it's more for a starting spot. It does not mean for a roster spot. I think the Lakers can keep both and can have a contending roster with both players on the team. I think it's more so just one of those guys probably has to move to the bench. I know a lot of people want Austin to move to the bench. I am skeptical that is going to happen. I think the more likely thing would be either moving Rui to the bench or potentially trading him for that starting wing or for that starting center and upgrading the roster that way. But we'll see. I think it's still too early to tell. There's a lot of moving parts that are going to go into this. But I think Austin can be a viable number 3. I think he just has to be supported in a certain way with a lot of defense, length, and athleticism and size, and taking him off of being the primary backcourt defender, which I think is just not the optimal way to use him. Now, as for the final question here, can Luka and AR be the starting backcourt of a championship team? AR is an elite number 3 option, but with Luka, I think he's a terrible fit because of their deficiencies on defense. I will say that if you actually look at the defensive data, I'm sure some of you guys saw this on X. There have been a graphic circulating of the best one-on-one defenders in the first round of the playoffs. And one of the names on the list was Austin Reaves against Anthony Edwards. This was on a per possession basis. And there is some noise, certainly, with some of the individual lineup data defensively. But what I will say with this is I think Austin was better defensively in this series than a lot of people are giving him credit for. I think if you go back and rewatch the series, and I've watched all 5 games at least twice, including game 5. I did not want to rewatch that game, but I've rewatched them all at least twice. And if you go back and see, like, are there times where Austin gets switched onto Julius Randle and he takes him in the post and scores on him or draws a foul? Yes. Are there times where Naz Reid or Rudy Gobert overpower him in the paint for an offensive rebound? Yes. But there's also plenty of times where he holds his own in one-on-one matchups. And there's also a lot of smart stuff that he does off the ball in terms of his off-ball screen navigation and tracking, his stunting, his helping, his rotating, taking charges, boxing out, and battling bigger guys in the paint, and just being a smart, active help defender and team defender. And that is something that I think when he's at his best, he does very well. And to be clear, he did not like shut down and I'm not trying to say that by any means, but I think with Austin sometimes, like, he's one of those defenders where his mistakes or his shortcomings can be loud. And we remember Julius Randle bulldozing him on the way to the rim, dropping the shoulder, knocking him over and scoring. But we don't remember the smart stunt or rotation or help that does lead to stopping a basket that is effective, that is a part of the defense. So I think with Austin, that's just something to keep in mind. Now, as I just talked about, you got to be careful with putting too much on his plate defensively. Now, if we were talking about the optimal way to build around Luka, I think that's a bit of a different conversation. And again, this is probably its own podcast of how Austin fits into all this. And I can't dive into it as much as I would like to. I think you can make the case that there is a limitation to Austin and Luka together, and that the Lakers would be better off if they really want to maximize Luka and optimize him. You know, it's LeBron, it's a new center, and then it's like 2 athletic wings around Luka, and that's the construction. And you can certainly make that case, but I don't think that's the way that the Lakers are going to go. So within the realistic parameters of how I think this offseason is going to go, I think it is going to feature Austin. And I think if you are trying to build around Austin within the Luka, LeBron universe, I think you just need more athleticism, size, and length at the other positions. And I think that needs to be a big priority for the Lakers. Now, do the Lakers consider moving him back into a bench role and he becomes the Manu Ginobili and that's the way they want to approach that? That could be a way that this goes, but I would also look at that 2024 build. They had Kyrie Irving in the starting lineup in the closing lineup playing a lot. And I'm not going to compare them offensively because, of course, Kyrie's at a much higher level, different tier than Austin. But I'm looking at this through a defensive lens where Austin is bigger, and I think he is a better defensive player than Kyrie Irving. Kyrie is underrated on the defensive end, and when he locks in, he can be a solid disruptive defender. But there's just a physical limitation with him that Austin's 3 or 4 inches bigger. I think he is better navigating guys around screens. He's good at taking charges. He's a good team and help defender. He's also a good defensive rebounder for his size, for his position. My point is, like, if Kyrie could be part of a good defense around Luka, I think Austin can be too. I think you just got to be more careful with the other 3 positions, particularly in the front court. I think there's going to be more Austin conversation moving forward, and certainly Austin needs to be better. It was a disappointing postseason for him, and I think there are some things to explain that. I think Minnesota is arguably the worst matchup in the league for him. He was dealing with this toe injury that we found out about afterward. He constantly is playing through injuries, and I think it's almost to his detriment that he is stubborn, like refuses. Of course, in the playoffs, it's different, but like in general, he's constantly playing through injuries. He refuses to rest or sit out, and he refuses to let it be known that he is dealing with something. And sometimes that works against him because he goes through these struggles where he's actually dealing with an ailment or two, but he just doesn't want it to be known. At the same time, like, you can come up with whatever excuses or justifications. Like, he just has to be better. If he's going to be playing, if he's going to be out there, he has to be better. He has to improve as a catch and shoot player. He has to improve, I think, maintaining his legs deeper into the postseason. This is back-to-back postseasons now where he has struggled as a three-point shooter in particular. And when looking at his fit with Luka offensively, his three-point shooting is going to play a big role in his viability next to Luka on that end, because as we know, Luka is going to have the ball a lot and he's going to generate a lot of catch and shoot opportunities, and Austin has to be at around 40% on those in the playoffs. Forget regular season. He's done that before, but come playoff time, he has to be hitting at around 40% on those shots to optimize the fit with Luka. Next question from @Robert John Marcella 263. Who are we targeting this offseason, especially centers and power forwards? For our purposes, I'm going to be focusing more on centers than power forwards because I think you can make the case that at least 4, if not 5, of the Lakers' top 8 players trend more toward power forward defensively. Offensively, you can be positionless, like guys don't need to fit into a certain box, but when you're talking positions, you're talking defense specifically. Lakers have LeBron, Rui, Luka, DFS, and Vando, who you could all make a case their best position defensively is power forward. With Vando, I would contend that he can guard wings, he can guard guards. So Vando's got a certain level of defensive versatility. It's actually more the offensive end where Vando trends more like a 4 or more like a 5. So I think it goes through the center spot, where right now it's Jackson Hayes and then nothing. And they need a starting center who can slot Jackson as a backup, and maybe even another guy who can push Jackson as a backup, but certainly one like clear upgrade at the starting center spot. As far as center targets or center candidates, I think a couple of names on the trade market interest me most, and that would be first Nick Claxton. That is the guy that I think should be atop the Lakers list. That's probably for me the best among the realistic targets. So I would have Nick Claxton number 1. It is a big contract. It is going to be a little tricky to match it, but the Lakers are right now projected to be under the first apron, so they will have the ability to aggregate contracts in a potential trade. And if there is a way for the Lakers to get Nick Claxton, I think that is a no-brainer for them. I think he would fit with Luka in the pick and roll. Defensively, he is among the most versatile centers in the league. He can switch out onto the perimeter. He can also protect the rim. He's an underrated post defender despite his slight frame. So I think Nick Claxton would check a lot of the boxes for the Lakers, and not the perfect player, and they're not going to find the perfect center, but among the candidates that I think are realistic as of right now, to me, Nick Claxton is the one who would make the most sense and who is the best. The other name that I like is going to be an interesting one because I don't think he's going to necessarily be available to the Lakers, but Daniel Gafford from Dallas. And we could go back to that interaction that Luka and Gafford had at the end of Luka's return in Dallas. And there's some speculation as to what was said or what was implied with that interaction, we'll say. But I would have a tough time seeing Nico Harrison and Patrick Dumont making a trade with the Lakers again, helping Luka get his preferred vertical lob threat rim protector type in Gafford. But if there was a way for the Lakers to do something like Maxi Kleber and Dalton Connect and a first for Daniel Gafford, or even Gabe Vincent and Dalton Connect and a first, ideally like lottery protected first, but you might have to give that up and slightly overpay to get a Gafford, especially given the public discourse and what the reaction would likely be if the Lakers and Mavericks traded again. But those are probably my two favorite candidates, because if we get into it with the center options in terms of free agency, and as of right now, the Lakers are only projected to have the $5.7 million taxpayer mid-level exception available. They can create enough space to get to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, but that would only be possible if they shed some salary, and that will likely require draft compensation going out. So they could go about it one of two ways: either trade for a center and use their draft compensation that way, or they could dump somebody into a situation with cap space or a little bit of salary room. There are not many teams that qualify for that, so that's where it gets a little tricky, but they could shed some salary, maybe a Maxi Kleber, do some type of a dump with him and get into the non-taxpayer mid-level range. However, the one issue with that is it does hard cap them at the first apron, so they will be limited with how they build the roster, and they probably would actually have to shed even more salary from there. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it is something I will be calculating at some point in the offseason. But looking at the top centers in terms of previous annual value, how much money they were making on their previous contracts entering free agency, you got Brook Lopez, Clint Capella, Miles Turner, Naz Reid, Steven Adams. Then we got to Mo Wagner, Al Horford, Kevon Looney, Andre Drummond, Dwight Powell, Taj Gibson. It gets grim pretty quickly. I like Brook Lopez, but he is 37. He has slipped as an offensive weapon and also as a rim protector and just overall defender. On a short-term deal, I think you could do worse. I think he's a notable upgrade on Jackson Hayes, but he did get played off the floor in that Indiana first-round series, and that would be a concern. But I think that it's maybe more of a concern in the East, not as much of a concern in the West, where there are some bigger teams, some slower teams. So I like Brook Lopez. I would prefer Claxton or Gafford and trading for one of those guys. Clint Capella is another one who he's 31. He has slipped as a rim protector, as a defender, no longer the finisher or lob threat that he used to be in his heyday in Houston and earlier in his Atlanta tenure. So he's another one that you could talk me into depending on the price point, but an imperfect fit. And I don't know if he's a starting level center, to be completely honest. I think he's probably more of a backup center type. Then we get to Miles Turner, who I just don't think is going to be available for the non-taxpayer MLE. Remember, that's about 14 million starting out. Turner's making 20.5 million. As I reported around the trade deadline, I was hearing he's looking for around 30 million this summer, 30 million annually. I don't think he's going to get that, but I think he should get at least the 20 plus million, maybe somewhere in the mid 20s from Indiana, most likely. But that would rule out the Lakers. I just don't see them being able to clear enough money to sign Turner. And if you do it, you could maybe do a sign and trade, but then you're hard capped at the first apron again, and it gets a bit complicated there. I don't think Indiana necessarily does that. Then Naz Reid is another one making just under 14 million right now, but that is only going to go up. I think he's going to be someone probably making 20 plus million annually starting next season. So I don't think he's in the Lakers price range. Offensively, I really like the fit. Defensively, there are some concerns with his defense, with his rim protection. Then we get to the Steven Adams, Al Horford range, where I like both of those guys as backup centers, but neither one of them as starting centers. Steven Adams has some limitations defensively with his mobility, and offensively isn't going to give you much outside of the offensive rebounding and occasionally finishing a dump off pass, but is not a vertical lob threat. Al Horford is almost 39, and the Celtics have been load managing him over the past couple of years. So that's one where, again, depending on the price point, I'd be interested, but more so as a backup center. So if you want to add Steven Adams or Al Horford as a backup to a Brook Lopez, a Clint Capella, or you trade for Claxton or Gafford, and then you also add Adams or Horford, I like that. And then maybe you keep Jackson as well, and you got a bit of a center rotation there. But it gets slim really quickly, and there aren't many available center candidates. Like the center position is becoming more valuable again. And I think teams are trying to hold on to these types of guys. So we could throw out a Walker Kessler or a Jalen Duren. Like I just don't see those guys being available, especially for what assets the Lakers have and what assets they'd be willing to give up in a potential center trade. So looking at it, I like Nick Claxton. I like Daniel Gafford if the Mavericks are willing to play ball. Lopez and Capella, I guess among the free agent options, those are guys I'd be interested in, but there's a bit of a drop off there from that first tier with Claxton. Like I would put Claxton as a tier 1, Gafford as tier 2, Lopez and Capella as tier 3, tier 4 maybe is empty, and then tier 5 is like Adams and Horford. That's probably how I would tentatively rank it. Maybe even like Adams tier 5, Horford tier 6, whatever, but it gets slit. And then you got Kevon Looney, Drummond, Mason Plumlee, Thomas Bryant, Jackson Hayes. Like it just, there's not a lot of good center options in free agency. So I think the most likely way the Lakers are going to solve this is via trade. Next question from @Haiti LeBlanc 3075. If Luka did not sign an extension, would you be willing to deal him for Giannis if that was an option? For the record, I think Luka is fine. I'm just curious if any player is as valuable as him. I like the last part of this question, especially. It reminds me of Bill Simmons' trade value rankings and how many players you would actually pick over him. For me, there is only one name that I would clearly pick ahead of Luka Doncic, and that's Victor Wembanyama. And even with Wemby, just given his size and the history of players at that size, and given the unfortunate health scare that he had this season, which I hope he makes a full recovery, but when evaluating long-term prospects and how they are going to fare over the rest of their NBA career, I think there is some uncertainty and some questions with him moving forward, but I would not overthink that. You take Wemby, he is 21, and he has arguably the brightest future in the NBA. So that is the only player in the league I would firmly take ahead of Luka moving forward. Otherwise, I think there are 5 guys you could make a case for, though I think you could poke holes in all of those cases. I think you got Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo as a couple of older guys, a couple guys who I would take ahead of Luka right now if I were trying to win a championship. They are both ahead of him in my current player rankings. However, they're both 30, and when compared to Luka at 26, you have to factor in the aging curve and where those guys are going to be at the end of the decade, at the beginning of the next decade. And so while I would take them over him right now, I would not take them over him long-term, looking multiple years into the future. And then there's 3 younger guys that I think you can make a case for in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, and Anthony Edwards. However, my issue with all of those 3 players, Tatum's technically a year older than Luka. He's younger compared to Giannis and Jokic, but he's not younger than Luka. And I'm not trying to let any of the recency bias with the Knicks series cloud my judgment, but I think Luka has been the better playoff performer, championship aside. And if anything, I mean, Jaylen Brown won finals MVP. So I would take Luka over Jason Tatum. And then you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is a few months younger than Luka, but I just don't think quite is at the same level offensively, both as a pure scorer and as a playmaker and passer and decision maker. He has a better roster. He has a better supporting cast overall, but I would take Luka. He's a far more proven playoff performer. And then Anthony Edwards is the wild card in this mix. I think he has the potential to be the best player in the league one day, or at least the top 3 player in the league, especially when factoring in his defense. But as we've seen with him, there have been some consistency issues, some decision-making issues, and I don't think he's quite at that level of a Jokic, a Giannis, a Luka. And to be clear, I think he can get to that level, and he's only 23. He's going to be turning 24 in August, but I still lean Luka. That one to me is a little bit more of a conversation just based on the age gap and where Ant already is in his career. But I think I would take Luka probably number 2. In terms of Luka for Giannis, I would not overreact to Luka potentially not signing an extension this summer. That does not mean he's going to leave the Lakers. If anything, it is more of a leverage play and keeping some semblance of power and control over his future. But I would not overreact to him not signing that extension. Remember, you have to wait until August 2nd for him to sign that extension. And with Giannis, I think his situation, if he gets traded, will probably be resolved by then at that point. So I don't even know if a Giannis-Luka trade is going to be possible if the Lakers are waiting to make that decision after an extension. So I don't think this is a realistic trade by any means. Next one from at Bruce Amato 9419. Do you think this is LeBron's last year? You're putting me on the spot here, Bruce. I'm not sure, to be completely honest. We did report at The Athletic last year that we were hearing from sources close to LeBron that he was likely going to play up to 2 more seasons, which would take him through the 2025-26 season, which would mean that next season would be his last year. However, I think there are some things that could have changed that, including the Luka trade and Bryce James and his potential future in the NBA. So I would not be surprised if LeBron ends up playing longer than next season. I do think it's probably going to be next season or the season after. I have a hard time seeing him playing beyond 2 more years, but certainly possible with LeBron. I think if we look at the outcome pie, right, and you got the blame pie, which is a big one these days, but if you have the outcome pie, what is most likely to happen, I think that there are several slices in there. One would be retiring now. One would be playing 1 more year. One would be playing 2 more years. One would be playing 3 more years. Among those slices, I think playing 1 more year would be the biggest slice. I think playing 2 more years would be the second biggest slice. I think retiring would be the third biggest slice. And I think playing 3 more years would be the smallest slice. So I'm between 1 to 2 more years. If I had to bet or lean in one direction, I would lean more toward 1 more year, but certainly possible that he plays a bit longer. I think we will get some clarity at some point this offseason entering next season. I think if LeBron is going to retire, he would probably want a retirement tour similar to what we saw with Kobe Bryant in 2015, 2016. I think it would be a proper send-off for him to have a retirement tour. So I think whenever he decides to hang it up, we will get a heads up going into that season. But again, I think if I had to lean one way or the other, I would lean 1 year. Next one from at Connor_Phillips 5689. If you could give Luka one piece of advice and have him listen to it, what would it be? Connor is putting me on the spot here as well. So if I had to give Luka a piece of advice that he had to listen to, I would just state this case to him, that right now he is on a trajectory to be a top 25, 20, 15 player of all time. He has that potential. He stacks up favorably against a lot of those guys at this stage of their career. Most of the guys on that list did not have championships, at least more of the modern guys. There are some exceptions, guys like Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, etc. But looking at guys like LeBron or MJ, Magic had one, of course, but Shaq didn't have a. You go down the list, Hakeem, like Dirk. But I think he's on that path, and he has a real shot to be among the all-time greats. And I think really, if he hits his ceiling, if he hits his potential, could go down as a top 10 player of all time. And so I would just challenge him to be more disciplined this summer and enter next season in the best shape of his career. And we've seen it from him in years past. We've seen what he looks like when he's slimmed down. We've seen what he looks like when he is in better shape. I don't even think it's necessarily a weight thing. You look at a guy like Nikola Jokic, his weight has fluctuated through the years, but he is always in tip-top condition. One of the things that stood out to me the most watching those Lakers-Nuggets series over the past couple of years was you look at AD and you look at Nikola Jokic and you think AD is sculpted one way, Jokic is sculpted another way. AD is the guy who should be in better shape, and that just was not the case. Jokic was beating him down the floor. Jokic was the one who had the extra energy reserves in crunch time, and he was getting to loose balls and offensive rebounds and whatnot, making the big plays, whereas AD was starting to run out of gas in those fourth quarters or just not playing with the same energy level as Jokic. I think Luka, it's not about six packs. It's not about having the Corey Maggette, Desmond Bain style biceps. It's just about being in better shape and having that energy in the fourth quarters, late in games, in crunch time, in a way that I don't think he quite had it in the first round series against Minnesota. So if he can get back to just more so focusing on the conditioning and getting into tip-top shape, championship shape, as JJ Redick challenged him, I think that's where he can be the best player in the league next season. I think he can win an MVP. I think he can win multiple championships. And I think he can go down as a top 20, top 15, or maybe even top 10 player of all time. So I would just issue that challenge to him of, you have been so great through the first 7 years of your career. You are skilled, you are talented, you are gifted, and you've made the finals, you've made the conference finals, you have largely exceeded expectations in the postseason, both with your individual numbers, but also with your team performance. Like, I just think there needs to be a little bit of fine tuning with the mental approach and the physical approach going into next season, going into the rest of his career. And if he makes a couple of changes and uses the trade and uses the outside noise and some of the criticism that he's gotten over the last few months to fuel him to that next level, he can get there and be, again, the best player in the world, win MVPs, win championships, and actualize his potential as one of the most gifted and skilled and talented players of all time. And so we'll see. It is a big summer ahead for him. Next one from @EricDane. Do you think the Lakers would be able to land Nick Claxton, Walker Kessler, or Miles Turner if they included Reaves in the deal? To go back to my earlier point about trading Austin, I don't think any of these three players are players that the Lakers would consider trading him for. I don't think they're quite at the level of player that LA would want back for Austin. I think it would be selling low on him to varying degrees, depending on which player we're talking about here. But let's go through the hypothetical exercise from the opposing viewpoint, just to see if those teams would entertain an Austin trade. I think Brooklyn and Utah would. I think that the big thing with those two teams is they don't have clear directions in terms of their core and ball handling and like having that number one option. You also, as I mentioned before, have the Austin contract situation of you might only be getting him for one more year and then he could opt out and leave and sign elsewhere if he's not happy with how that 1 year goes. So that's a factor. He could be a flight risk. I think Brooklyn and Utah would both strongly consider trading for Austin for those bigs, but not entirely sold that they would do it necessarily, again, when just factoring in his contract situation and the uncertainty with that. In terms of Indiana, I actually don't think Indiana would do this because right now, Miles Turner is their only playable center. and they're potentially going to make the Eastern Conference Finals for the second straight season. I think they're going to try to retain him. And when looking at Indiana and their style of play, the center of their universe, the center of their offense is Tyrese Halliburton. And I think for all the questions we might have about Luka and Austin together, we would have even more questions about Tyrese Halliburton and Austin together. It can work in Team USA when those two guys are coming off the bench, but it's different when those two guys would be your starters in a backcourt. So I don't love the fit of Tyrese and Austin together. I don't think Indiana would like that fit, though I think Austin would play well in Indiana. If you catch my drift, similar to him playing well in Utah, play well with the fan base, let's say. But I actually don't think Indiana, like it just from a roster construction perspective, I think going from a center to a shooting guard / point guard, it just changes the entire soul of their team. And they are a team that's built around putting a lot of size and athleticism and defense and speed around Halliburton. And that changes if you get Austin instead of Turner. So I think Indiana would say no. I think Brooklyn and Utah would strongly consider it. Next one from @Alexander McDaniel 8404. What do you think of a Reaves / Connect with some light draft compensation for Lauri and Kessler? Obviously, throw in whatever you need to make the salaries good, but LA becomes the biggest starting lineup. Going back to the last trade that we just discussed with Reaves and Kessler, as I said, I don't think the Lakers would do that. Now, if you're doing Reaves and Connect for Lauri and Kessler, I think the Lakers would do that. You are trading one starter for two. If we want to say Austin versus Lauri is a relative wash, Dalton versus Kessler is not. That is decidedly in Kessler's favor. So as you're saying, maybe the Lakers throw in some light draft compensation to make this work. But I don't think Utah would do this. Going back to this past trade deadline and even going back to the offseason, they have been asking for at least 2 first-round picks for Kessler, to say nothing of what they want for Lauri. Remember, Golden State was trying to trade for Lauri at the deadline, and they just couldn't quite figure out a deal. So I don't think the Lakers have enough draft capital to execute this deal. So I think Utah would actually be the one saying no to it. From LA side, it is interesting. You would have the Lauri, LeBron, Kessler starting group. You could also downsize to close games with Lauri and LeBron and Rui or DFS and Luka, obviously, and then whoever is your fifth player there. But I think Utah is the one that says no here. And final question from @Danny Sawson 4282. Not Lakers related, but I graduated from college in May 2024 and aspire to have a career in sports media. And I'm wondering, what has the sacrifice and workload been like to get where you are today? Thanks. Really enjoy the show. Well, congrats on graduating, Danny. I know it's technically been a year, but still exciting to have recently graduated and to be pursuing a career in sports media. To me, there is nothing better, but of course, there is always an underbelly to any industry that you go into. So I like to be honest and transparent about that anytime I'm giving anybody any sports media advice. I would say, as an aside, go check out the Lakers Beat Writers Roundtable if you have not done so yet. We talk at the end for a good 10-15 minutes about sports media and our careers and our advice for anyone getting into sports media. We also talk throughout the whole show about what it's like to be a beat writer and some of the pros and cons and just what it's like to be on the road and all that stuff. So if you're interested in being a beat writer one day, I would check out that episode and not just hear from me, but hear from Dave McMenamin, Dan Wojcicki, and Kobe Price. But in terms of sacrifice and workload, I would say the biggest thing that I have sacrificed through this career is a semblance of a social life and a personal life. Working in sports, you're going to work holidays, you're going to work nights, you're going to work weekends, you're going to work odd hours. I am always on. There is really no sense of turning off at any moment. A trade could happen, a player could tweet something, some sort of news could occur, and I have to be ready to respond. And I have to be able to confirm it with sources. I have to be able to write about it, then come on here and talk about it with you guys, go live or record something. And so there's that element of just, you don't have the typical social life that you have in a traditional 9 to 5. I don't have a set time each week that I'm going to be off. Of course, there are breaks. And now with the Lakers eliminated from the postseason, I've had a bit of a break this week. And I've been recharging and sleeping more and catching up on some of the social time that I have not had for the past 7+ months. I missed a bunch of birthdays and parties. I missed several bachelor parties of very close friends that just have happened at the wrong time in April or May when the Lakers are in the playoffs or ramping up for the playoffs. And I work in the NBA, so August and September tend to be down periods. That's when I will take vacation. That's when things are a bit lighter from a workload perspective. But I try to be honest about some of the drawbacks or some of the downsides of this industry. So certainly from a sacrifice perspective, I think you're going to have to sacrifice depending on what you want to do. And I don't know what you want to do based on your question, but there is an element of sacrificing nights, weekends, holidays. Like I work Christmas, New Year's Eve, New Year's, July 4th, all Labor Day, Memorial Day, all those weekends when people have 3-day weekends or people are going on mini vacations. Like I am often working, like MLK Day, like just any holiday you could think of, I probably have worked or work every year. So that's just a part of the job. Now, in terms of workload, really depends on what you're going to do. But one thing I will say with this industry is that it is an industry with a high demand and low supply. So because of that, companies are able to lower the salaries and wages for entry-level positions. A lot of entry-level positions in sports are starting 30, 40, 50 grand a year, which depending on the industry you're going in, could be high, could be low, could be about average, but sports is not as glamorous or high paying as you think. Like the 0.01% are the ones making millions on TV and living the glamorous lifestyle of flying first class and black car everywhere and all that stuff. But like that is not the majority of people in the industry. It is a lot of people making a lot less money than you would think and working long hours. So I like to preface any sports talk with some of the real side of the industry. Now, with that said, I made this point before, but I speak at USC 1 to 2 times a semester. That is where I graduated from. And I tell some version of this spiel. And one thing that I say was when I was sitting in the audience and I had speakers come talk to me, they would share their version of this story of their experience in the industry. And I would always have this stubbornness and just this internal monologue of screw this person. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to prove them wrong, or I'm going to be one of the people that makes it. And that has always been a guiding principle for me, a guiding perspective for me with this industry of I understand every year they do the annual like top 5 worst jobs, worst careers, worst professions, and journalism is always in there. And I get it. It's not the most stable or best industry to be going into. It's not what I would advise you to go into if you can't avoid it. But if, like me, you hear me lay out the nights, the weekends, the holidays, the sacrificing personal stuff, the low entry level wages and just working all the time, and you still are not dissuaded from pursuing a career in sports, that to me is a sign you should pursue a career in sports, right? So I think it just depends how you're wired. I could not imagine myself doing anything else. I knew from the time that I was 8 years old, I wanted to do something within the NBA. I knew from the time I was 16 that I wanted to be a sports journalist. So I have been on this mission for over half my life, and I have been undeterred. And I've had roadblocks along the way that I've been able to overcome. I have had a lot of help along the way, a lot of luck, a lot of right place, right time. It helped being in LA where there were 2 NBA teams, which allowed me to start covering the NBA in college and being near ESPN, LA, and their LA offices. And just like, there's certainly been some breaks along the way, people that I have met that have become mentors that have been able to help me out, get jobs at ESPN or The Athletic, or just let me know what's going on in the industry. And certainly your networking is a big part of it. So I say all this to say, like, if you hear what I'm saying and you are undeterred, then I think that is your sign to pursue it. In terms of quick advice, biggest thing would just be start creating content. If you want to be a forward-facing reporter or journalist or personality, whatever you want to do, if you want to have a podcast, if you want to have a radio show, if you want to have a YouTube channel, if you want to write, if you have a phone and or a computer, you can create content. So I would say start your Substack, and even if you make it free at first, start your YouTube channel, start your podcast, and just create content and constantly learn and grow. I am constantly listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos about how to be better on camera, how to edit better, how to make better thumbnails, how to make better effects, and all these different things that you need to have a growth mindset and constantly be trying to tinker and get better. I'm never satisfied. Anytime I listen to myself, anytime I watch myself, there's always something I feel like I can be doing better or something I can be doing better with the show. So I think having that mindset of never just being complacent or resting on what you've done or what you think you've done, and always trying to be better in that regard. I would say network. I think you asking this type of question is a nice step in the right direction, but reach out to people that you are inspired by, that you enjoy their work, and try to pick their brain. Ask them to coffee, ask them for a phone call, depending on where you live. And then the third and final thing would be potentially considering moving. And it depends what you want to do. But if you want to be a beat reporter, if you want to be in the building, I think you should be in an NBA city or a sports city, again, depending on whatever sport you want to cover. But I think there is a value to being in the arena, being at the practice facility, and being around the team. So try to work at a radio station, a TV station, a fan blog, a newspaper, a digital publication, whatever it is, try to get your foot in the door. And then once your foot is in the door, kick that sucker open and never leave. That's what I tried to do. And I think I've done it so far. So that would be my general advice. If you have any more follow-up questions, be sure to email me at jbuha@theathletic.com. That goes for anybody else. If you want to email me, jbuha@theathletic. But that will do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back next week with part 2 of the mailbag. I will talk to you then.